At approximately 2:45 a.m. on Monday, the 31st of July 1972, Queensland's second worst mining disaster occurred at the Box Flat No. 5 colliery near Ipswich, killing 17 men and injuring many others. An inquiry was held in Ipswich which commenced on October 23, 1972 and closed on the 7th of November 1972. The inquiry found that a coal dust explosion was initiated by recirculation of a fire which had developed due to spontaneous combustion. 9 recommendations were made from the inquiry. Box Flat was an extensive mining complex and had been mining in Ipswich since 1900. There were multiple mines in multiple seams. The mine was worked by board and pillar, with several surface portals that entered the mine via steep drifts following the dip of the coal seams. Strata support consisted of wooden props, crowns, and some bolting. Following mechanisation, mining operations were by way of a Lee-Norse continuous miner, with shuttle cars fitting conveyors to transport the coal to the surface. At approximately 4 p.m. on Sunday, the 30th of July, the manager had started the main surface fan to restore ventilation to the mine following an 11-hour stoppage due to a power outage at the mine. In the absence of any gas monitoring system, his diligent practice of smelling the air detected a slight paraffin smell of a possible spontaneous heating somewhere in the mine. Others could not detect the smell. Still concerned, the manager and the under-manager in charge made an inspection of the mine in an attempt to detect the source of the strange smell in the return ventilation. At approximately 5:25 p.m, both men entered the mine via the No. 7 man and supply tunnel to carry out an inspection. After approximately 45 minutes, the location of the heating was detected in the No. 5 mine south return. Smoke had filled a dead heading against the stopping, but no smoke was observed in the return roadway. Crawling on their hands and knees under the smoke, a small heating was identified. The glowing coal was reported as being approximately 1 metre square in area with no flames present. Not being able to extinguish the heating themselves, the managers returned to the surface to arrange help to handle the situation. It was believed that it could be handled quicker if assistance was arranged rather than trying to put it out themselves. After calling men to the mine, the first team departed the surface at approximately 7 p.m. via the No. 5 mine man and supply road. The general manager led the men to the heating. By 7:45 p.m, water was being applied to the heating, which was reported as glowing coal and not a fire, but it was growing. Around the same time, a request was made to the manager, who was on the surface, from the general manager underground to slow the fan down, presumably to reduce the airflow fanning the heating. In response to this request, the manager set the main fan to a ticking overspeed at around 8:15 p.m. The ventilating pressure was reduced from 5 inches to 3 inches of water gauge. Mines rescue were considered due to the need for a foam plug to minimise the ventilation to the location of the heating. The Queensland Mines Rescue Brigade were contacted at approximately 8:15 p.m. After further phone calls to the Chief Inspector of Coal Mines and Managing Director of Box Flat, the manager later re-entered the mine via No. 7 man and supply road. The men continued to fight the fire with water hoses from an adjacent cut-through that led to the intake haulage road north side of the fire location. Despite efforts to suppress the fire with water, it was soon apparent that the flames were now clearly evident and taking hold of timber and coal outby along the return roadway. Shortly after, smoke was reported to be coming down the intake haulage road. Unknowingly to the men at this point in time, the rising heat and smoke from the fire's intensity had created a thermal expansion such that the mine air was no longer being drawn out the mine via the main fan. This was due to the effects of convection in conjunction with the slow-moving air and its natural route down a 1-in-1 drift which connected the No. 5 mine to the No. 7 mine. Heat rises, and as such the expanding air was not able to escape rapidly enough. This in turn caused a pressure equilibrium between the intake and return roadways, forcing a set of double air doors located just in-by of the drift to open. In normal circumstances, the doors were held closed due to the pressure difference between the intake and return roadways. What happened next is known as recirculation. Instead of the return air, smoke and gas normally being exhausted out of the mine, the airflow was now recirculating through the air doors into the intake haulage road and feeding into the intake air and back over the fire. By approximately 10 PM, the decision was made for all men to evacuate the mine due to the thick smoke now circulating into the intake air roadway. The fire continued to rapidly grow along the return road. At approximately 11:15 PM, Mr. Hardy, the inspector, with others went back into the mine with a view to reaching the doors concerned and correcting the position. However, they were unable to reach the doors on the account of the smoke. A further attempt was made to reach the doors by travelling by way of the pit bottom using self-contained breathing equipment. This attempt also proved abortive. It was remarked that the firefighting teams were in retreat from the fire rather than advancing on it. The men returned to the surface at approximately 12:15 AM. After further discussions, it was decided to investigate the practicality of cutting off the air intake from number 7 to number 5, which was feeding the fire in number 5. Mr. Hardy, Mr. Laurie and others boarded the number 7 man and supply rake and again entered the mine around 12:40 AM. Basing their findings on the conditions observed in number 7, the men returned to the surface at approximately 1:20 AM. It was decided that it was feasible to make an attempt to control the fire by temporarily sealing off the stone drives between number 7 mine and number 5, 460 metres from the surface. At approximately 2:15 AM, a team of 14 men entered the number 7 mine man and supply tunnel with the intention of carrying out this decision into effect. A short time afterwards, John Roach, a member of the rescue team, rang the surface and advised that smoke was now backing up against the intake in number 7, where previously airflow had been normal. It can be assumed that after the telephone call to the surface that the men would have started to make their retreat out of the mine. At 2:45 AM, an underground explosion of considerable magnitude occurred. Eyewitness reports indicated that 2 large blasts occurred in succession, with catastrophic force, severely injuring a number of workers who were on the surface. At the time of the explosion, 3 other men had been working approximately 30 metres inside number 5 Belt Road, preparing for sealing operations. All 3 were killed as a result of the explosion. 14 of the surface workers around the vicinity were injured from showering debris and blast forces. One of the injured men, who had been inside the destroyed deputy's cabin, succumbed to his injuries 14 months after the explosion. In consideration of the severity of the blast and the hostile conditions of the thick smoke still exhausting from the mine entrances, difficult decisions had to be made. It was concluded that the men underground in number 7 mine would have perished immediately and that any attempt to recover them would render more lives at risk. Conscious of the fact that there had been 14 men underground in number 7 mine and 3 others in number 5, who at this time had been confirmed as fatalities, an executive decision was made to seal off the mine indefinitely. By 5:45 PM on Monday, the 31st of July, just 15 hours after the explosion, all mine entrances were sealed, entombing the 14 miners below ground. The box flat disaster was attributed to the combined power of 2 fundamental reasons that lean on each other. The timing of the coal's spontaneous heating within the mine could not have been worse. If the 11-hour fan stoppage had not been in place, the temperatures probably would not have reached the level they did, and thus the fire would never have ignited. The second issue is recirculation and the role it played in the explosion. Recirculation is defined as being any amount of ventilation that passes through the same area more than once, leading to an unwanted and often dangerous situation, including a build-up of contaminants and in particular, flammable or explosive gases. It is deadly. Vain attempts at fighting the fire had been marred by these factors.
The inquiry found that there was a complete lack of knowledge of the risks of recirculation, and it is an area where education of all personnel associated with mining might be improved.
Despite the adjusting of the ventilation to slow the fan down, it would have been inevitable that the recirculation would have occurred regardless due to the fire and the characteristics of the mine. Box flat was particularly complex due to the interconnection of workings in multiple seams. Sealing the entire mine would have been a catastrophic decision, and not one person suggested it, but it needed to be made. Even with the detection of recirculation, not one person, no statutory official, no manager, no inspector, no mines rescue official, no volunteer, no one identified the significant risk of an explosion. The inquiry concluded that there was an industry issue with regard to the knowledge of the industry in relation to controlling mine fires. Sadly, only 3 years later, a spontaneous combustion and fire resulted in an explosion at the Kayanga mine near Mara, killing another 13 miners. The box flat inquiry outlined 9 recommendations in light of the evidence given. The lessons learned from the box flat disaster and other mining disasters come at a cost far too great to allow those events to be repeated. In memory of the box flat miners, lest we forget.